The year was 1914. Europe was a continent of empires, a mosaic of nations and cultures, each with its own ambitions and rivalries. The streets were bustling with life, yet beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Europe was a continent of empires. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, the German Empire, the Russian Empire, the British Empire, and the French Republic were the dominant forces, each vying for power and prestige. These empires were not just political entities, they were symbols of national pride and ambition. Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, Great Britain, and France were major powers. Their armies were vast, their navies formidable, and their influence extended across continents. The soldiers of these nations stood ready, their uniforms crisp, their faces resolute, unaware of the horrors that awaited them. They competed for land, resources, and influence around the world. This competition created tension. Colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Americas were pawns in a global game of chess, their people often caught in the crossfire of imperial ambitions. The ports were bustling with ships, the lifelines of empires carrying goods, soldiers, and sometimes the seeds of conflict. On June 28, 1914, a young Serbian nationalist, Gavrilo Princip, assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in Sarajevo. This single act of violence, driven by nationalist fervor, would ignite a conflict that would engulf the world. This event set off a chain reaction. The news spread like wildfire, shocking the world. Headlines screamed of the assassination and crowds gathered, their faces a mix of fear, anger, and uncertainty. The delicate balance of power was shattered. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia and declared war. The machinery of war was set in motion. Troops were mobilized and declarations of war echoed through the capitals of Europe. The people, once hopeful for peace, now braced for the storm. A complex web of alliances drew other nations into the conflict. Treaties and pacts meant to ensure peace now pulled countries into the fray. Allies became enemies and the world was plunged into chaos. World War I, also known as the Great War, had begun. Soldiers marched off to war, their spirits high, believing it would be over by Christmas. Trenches were dug, and the landscape of Europe was scarred by the lines of battle. It was a war unlike any before it. The scale of the conflict was unprecedented, and the brutality was unimaginable. Battles raged across fields, forests, and towns, leaving devastation in their wake. New technologies such as machine guns and poison gas made it incredibly deadly. The weapons of war had evolved, and with them the ways in which men could kill and be killed. Machine guns mowed down waves of soldiers, and poison gas choked the life from those who breathed it in. Millions of soldiers and civilians would perish in the years to come. The toll of the war was not just in lives lost, but in the suffering of those who survived. Families were torn apart, cities were reduced to rubble, and the world was forever changed. The war would transform the political map of Europe and leave an enduring legacy on the 20th century and beyond. Borders were redrawn, empires crumbled, and new nations emerged from the ashes of the old. The consequences of the Great War would be felt for generations. This is the story of that war, a story of courage, sacrifice, and the enduring human cost of conflict. It is a tale of heroism and horror, of dreams shattered and hopes rekindled. It is a reminder of the price of war and the resilience of the human spirit. To understand the causes of World War I, we must look back to the decades leading up to 1914. The early 20th century was a time of great change and upheaval in Europe. The continent was a patchwork of powerful empires and emerging nations, each with its own ambitions and insecurities. Nationalism, a strong feeling of pride and loyalty to one's nation, was on the rise in Europe. This fervent nationalism was not just about love for one's country, it often involved a belief in the superiority of one's nation over others. This belief sometimes led to aggressive posturing and a desire to assert national dominance. Many ethnic groups within larger empires longed for their own independent nations. These groups, such as the Slavs in the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Poles in the Russian Empire, sought to break free from the control of their imperial rulers. Their aspirations for self-determination were often met with resistance, leading to unrest and conflict. This desire for self-determination often led to tension and conflict. The ruling authorities were determined to maintain their control, while the ethnic groups were equally determined to achieve their independence. This created a volatile situation that was ripe for conflict. Imperialism, the pursuit of empires and colonies, also fueled rivalry among the European powers. The major powers of Europe were engaged in a race to acquire colonies and expand their empires. This competition was not just about gaining territory, it was also about securing resources and markets for their industries. Competition for colonies in Africa and Asia created friction, particularly between Germany and Great Britain. Germany, a relatively new and rapidly industrializing nation, sought to challenge Britain's long-standing dominance. This rivalry extended beyond Europe and into their colonial possessions, where both nations sought to expand their influence. Perhaps the most significant factor leading to war was the system of alliances that had developed in Europe. These alliances were intended to provide security and deter aggression by creating powerful blocs of allied nations. However, they also meant that any conflict involving one nation could quickly draw in its allies, escalating the situation. These alliances were meant to deter aggression, but instead created a dangerous web of commitments. The major alliances were the Triple Entente, consisting of France, Russia and Great Britain, and the Triple Alliance made up of Germany, Austria-Hungary and Italy. These alliances created a situation where a conflict between two countries could quickly involve many others. When one nation declared war, its allies were obligated to join the fight, quickly escalating a regional conflict into a global war. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in June 1914 set off a chain reaction of events. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and within weeks, the complex web of alliances drew all the major European powers into the conflict, leading to the outbreak of World War I. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo was the spark that ignited the powder keg of Europe. Austria-Hungary, determined to punish Serbia, issued an ultimatum with deliberately harsh terms. Serbia, backed by Russia, refused to meet all of the demands. On July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia on August 1st and on France, Russia's ally, on August 3rd. Germany's war plans called for a swift invasion of France through neutral Belgium. This violation of Belgian neutrality brought Great Britain into the war on August 4th. Within a week, the major powers of Europe were at war. The world watched in disbelief as the continent descended into chaos. Section 4, Trenches and Technology, a new kind of warfare. World War I introduced a new era of warfare, characterized by industrialized killing and unprecedented carnage. The scale of destruction was unlike anything the world had ever seen before. Entire landscapes were transformed into desolate wastelands and cities were reduced to rubble. The war's impact was felt not just on the battlefield but also on the home front, as nations mobilized their entire populations for the war effort. The development of new technologies such as the machine gun, the tank and long-range artillery revolutionized combat. These innovations made traditional military tactics obsolete and forced armies to adapt to a new kind of warfare. The machine gun, for instance, could mow down waves of attacking soldiers, making frontal assaults incredibly costly and often futile. Poison gas, another deadly innovation, transformed the battlefield into a nightmarish hellscape. Chlorine and mustard gas caused agonizing injuries and deaths, and soldiers had to wear gas masks to survive. The psychological terror of gas attacks added a new dimension to the horrors of war. On the Western Front, a line of trenches stretched for hundreds of miles from the English Channel to Switzerland. These trenches became the defining feature of World War I, symbolizing the static, grueling nature of the conflict. The trench systems were complex, with frontline support and reserve trenches connected by communication trenches. Soldiers on both sides endured horrific conditions in these trenches, facing constant shelling, machine gun fire, and the ever-present threat of poison gas attacks. Life in the trenches was a daily struggle for survival, with soldiers contending with mud, rats, and disease. The psychological strain was immense as the men lived in constant fear and witnessed unimaginable horrors. The threat of poison gas attacks was a constant source of dread. Soldiers had to be ever vigilant, ready to don their gas masks at a moment's notice. The gas attacks not only caused physical suffering but also left deep psychological scars. Trench warfare resulted in a stalemate, with neither side able to make significant gains despite massive casualties. The area between the opposing trenches, known as no man's land, was a deadly expanse of barbed wire, shell craters, and the remnants of failed attacks. Attempts to break the stalemate often resulted in horrific losses, with little to show for the sacrifice. The horrors of trench warfare left an indelible mark on the soldiers who fought there, many of whom suffered from shell shock, now known as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. The psychological toll of the war was immense, with countless soldiers returning home deeply traumatized by their experiences. The legacy of World War I's trench warfare is a stark reminder of the devastating human cost of industrialized conflict. Section 5: Blood and Mud. Key battles of the Western Front. The Western Front was the scene of some of the bloodiest battles in human history. The Battle of the Somme, fought in 1916, epitomized the horrors of trench warfare. On the first day of the battle alone, the British Army suffered nearly 60,000 casualties, making it the bloodiest day in British military history. Another infamous battle was the Battle of Verdun, fought between French and German forces in 1916. The battle raged for months, resulting in hundreds of thousands of casualties on both sides. Despite the horrific losses, neither battle resulted in a decisive victory for either side. The stalemate on the Western Front dragged on, claiming millions of lives in a war of attrition. Section 6: The Home Front, Total War and its impact on society. World War I was a total war, meaning that it involved not just the armies in the field, but entire societies. Governments mobilized their economies for war production. Factories were converted to produce weapons and ammunition. Rationing of food and other essential goods became commonplace. Women took on new roles in the workforce, filling jobs previously held by men who were away fighting. Propaganda played a key role in shaping public opinion and maintaining morale. The war had a profound impact on society, changing gender roles, accelerating industrial production, and leaving countries deeply divided. Section 7: 1917, America joins the fray. The United States, initially neutral, entered the war on the side of the Allies in 1917. Several factors contributed to America's decision to join the war. Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare, which targeted civilian ships, angered the American public. The sinking of the Lusitania, a British passenger liner that was torpedoed by a German submarine in 1915, killing over 1,000 people, including 128 Americans, further inflamed anti-German sentiment. The Zimmermann telegram, a secret diplomatic cable intercepted by British intelligence, revealed a German plot to encourage Mexico to attack the United States. America's entry into the war proved to be a turning point, providing much-needed troops and resources to the Allied war effort.